to your employer there if it's getting too cold. Once it drops below 16 degrees, time to go home.
No, we're just nice in here. We're all right.
Folks, I think that's nearly everybody joining us. I can't see who's at the bottom of the screen here. We have an agenda kindly sent out by Rachel. And a big thanks to Pete once again for hosting for us today. So in a minute or two, we're going to turn to Sinead McPolan from Regen Robotics. And then after that, Gavin Kane from Quadra. We'll have an update from HSE from Justine. And then Rachel has kindly agreed to speak to the Student Ambassador Awards for us later. But is there any other business now that anybody wants to raise? We have a safety alert to discuss as well. Any other business just at this point? Silence is fine. I can live with silence, okay. Justine, would you just like to mention the safety alert, and then that'll give Sinead a bit of a run in, and you can get queued up there, Sinead. So Justine, over to you for a moment or two.
Yeah, so the safety alert was regarding a loading shovel bucket. So what had happened was the old edge had been removed. It was due to be replaced. So the operative actually cleaned the base edge with a scraper, but before he fitted the new edge, he then noticed that there was still some dirt on the remaining base edge. Now, instead of actually taking the scraper or a brush to remove this dirt, what he did was run his safety boot, his foot along it. Now, this is extremely sharp, so it was worn sharp like a razor, and it sliced through his safety boot just above the steel toe cup and sliced his foot open. So we did require stitches and had to go to A&E, and it was reported to us as a lost time incident because obviously he had to take time off to ease the pressure on the face and get his foot, back to normal. So it's just really to alert you that once the cutting edge has been removed on a loading shovel bucket, please be aware that that exposed edge can be very, very sharp. So never run your hand or foot along that. Always use a scraper or a brush. Now, we asked Conexpo to produce this safety alert because, to be honest, we hadn't actually come across an incident reported to us like this before. And I've forwarded it on to yourselves and shared it with you because obviously you would use similar equipment within the waste industry, certainly moving waste and that around. So potentially some of you may have come across this before. It may be an activity that yourselves or your fitters carry out. So it's just to bring it to your attention that tasks like these can cause significant injuries.
Okay, thanks, Justine. Are there any questions, folks? It's wonderful what you learn in the world of health and safety, isn't it?
And just to add on that, don't be surprised or be worried if whenever you do send in a RID, or what we are starting to do now is ask companies to produce safety alerts. The purpose of that isn't to highlight any wrongdoing on your company's behalf, it's to share it with the rest of industry so other people can learn with it. And whenever myself or Brian email you and ask you to produce a safety alert, it's entirely at you and your company's discretion whether you want to include your company name on it or not as well. But it's not mandatory, but we do encourage it where we think there's something that's worthwhile sharing.
Okie doke. So the key message is if you don't want to be in the press, don't have accidents. Okay, great. Since there's no questions, everybody, all minds content on that one. Thanks, Justine.
Thank you.
Sinead, how are you doing?
Hello, Jim. How are you? I'm good, thanks.
All right, I think it's over to you.
Okay, no bother. I'll just share my screen here now. Can everyone see it okay? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah? Is that everyone able to see it? Yeah?
Yep, all good.
Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Sinead McPolan and I am the Health and Safety Officer at Regen Robotics. So I'll just go ahead and tell you a little bit about ourselves and our company. So you probably know Regen Waste. We're based in Newry, Northern Ireland, and we're part of the Regen group. So we have the three partner companies, which is Materials Recovery Facility, which is Regen Waste, part of the Regen, which is the parent company, and its materials facility. So it's your blue or green bin, depending on your council, which is then exported to 29 countries worldwide. We then have our engineering facility, which is the engineering, which is our own trailer for the Regen Robotics, and again for the Regen waste. We then have Connex, which is our bathroom pod manufacturing. So it's the likes of your Holiday Inn, your Premier Inn. It's a off-site company, so it's your whole entire bathroom from electrics to tiling in a pod, and then it's set into the hotels. So each one's exactly the same. And then we have ourselves, the Regen Robotics. So our parent company, we operate since 2004. Regen currently employ 260 full-time staff. It's processing 160,000 tonnes of dry mixed recyclables. It's processing 120,000 tonnes of residual from the black bin as well. Its annual turnover in 2018 was 35 million. In 2019, it was 37 million, and it's exporting to 29 countries worldwide. And Regen is a 100% family-owned company. So then on to ourselves. Our vision is to become the most efficient, safe and reliable tank cleaning service provider to the petrochemical industry. It's distinguishing ourselves from other competitors through our excellent health and safety solutions, which is totally eliminating the need for confined space entry. We don't just aim to meet health and safety standards, we aim to create new standards across the tank cleaning industry. So an industry first, Regen Robotics is the first and only Zone 0X certified remote controlled no man entry robotic tank cleaning company in the UK and Europe. So it makes us different from the other companies is our full system setup, so self-sufficient, so there's no need for other on-site materials or contractors. We're able to do it all within our own control system. It's 100% no man entry. It's leading in safety, setting new industry standards, and its intelligent reporting systems. So a little bit about who our people are. So we invest in our employees and train them to the highest level, ensuring their knowledge in every aspect of the equipment and safe working policies. So I'm currently doing the NCRQ in health and safety. I'm still waiting on a few assessments to come back, but I'm doing it at the moment. Then with our operatives on sites, they're all NEBOSH health and safety, the confined space management, even though it's not, they don't really need to use, they don't have to use confined space, they are trained in case if the robot ever did break down, they're still able to go in. And they all have the first aid, high risk confined space entry and oil terminal training. So Regen Robotic is ISO certified in the health and safety, quality and so why use robotic tank cleaning? Firstly, it's very safe. We've removed the need for confined space entry, meaning there's zero risk to life when using our robotic system. The man hours reduced, leading to an overall reduction in both accidents and health and safety incidents. In March 2020, we lifted the Safety Technology Award at the Global Tank Storage Awards. And our robotic systems are setting new safety standards across the oil tank cleaning industry, eliminating the risk for injury or death in confined space. So why we tell our company it's more efficient, cleaning time per tank is reduced by a staggering 45%. Our self-contained system includes vacuum, jetting and robotics, nothing extra to hire or buy. Less mechanical isolation as spading of tanks is not required, and then overall less paperwork and permits required as it doesn't need for the actual humans to enter, it's robotic. So it leaves less risk assessments to have when going on site. So why use it? It's more intelligent. CCTV footage is recorded for every tank clean. So at the end of every tank clean, the companies are able to visually see from the cameras attached to the robot, the overall tank at the very end and how it's been cleaned, and they are able to inspect it. We provide ATEX lighting and camera system for in-depth no man entry inspections. Our trucks are fitted with an onboard telemetry system, which I can show you later what it all contains. So this is the range of tanks that we are able to clean at Regen Robotics. So the fixed roof, the floating roof, heavy fuel oil, cone floor, And then if your tank isn't something that we've done before, then our team are able to work along with you and see how we're able to clean it, and we'll always try to work a way around in order to offer our service to a tank that maybe they haven't cleaned before. So this is our equipment, the Zone 0 actuator robotic equipment. So it's remotely controlled from a air-conditioned control room. You have the squeezy head and the ogre head at one side. The remote is hydraulically operated, fitting through a standard manway. Ramps are hydraulically operated and fixed externally. And then this is a video of our 360 washing head. So this 360 washing head allows it to go up the walls as well. And you can see it'll move up and down, which allows then the overall tank to be fully cleaned. So this is the underground tank cleaner. Using our bespoke Zone 0 certified mini robot tank clean system, we enter underground tanks with manholes as small as 50 in diameter. The robot is lowered into the tank using the winch with high pressure water and suction devices connected. So this is for much smaller jobs as well we're able to do. So this is our onboard telemetry. Our combination unit provides real-time information on all key parameters. So this allows then for the contractors able to, or the people that we do the jobs for, to come and then see what all has been done. So this allows the hours worked per day, water consumption on each project, and jetting pressures recorded for duration of the tank. And then this is the control room, where the robots are controlled from. So it's earth point isolated and it's air conditioned. And see, this allows the two screens for the CCTV recordings to be seen. So the complete solution, it's a 2-man operation, 0-man entry into confined space, and reduce waste, and it's much more efficient. So for this following year, we're hoping to have the ADR tanker and robotic equipment in build due for this year. Cleaning underwater suction pipes around the external diameter of the tank. It's a faster turnaround times required on tank clean, and ability to carry out more in-depth remote inspections. So the benefits of overall robotic tank clean, it eliminates the need for humans in the confined space. It's efficient, so tank cleaning can be reduced by 45%. It's cost effective, so less downtime and more productivity, and exceeding the requirements of current legislations. So this is the Recent Award, Tank Storage Association Technology Award in 2020, and High Command at Hazard X Awards in 2020. So the recent jobs, the first ever one was in Northern Ireland Water. It was 14 metre below ground sewer line. The next was the Shell Oil Haven Terminal and Vermilion Energy, so down in Mayo. So the overall results from the past 2 years of robotic tank cleaning is it's safer, cleaner, and more efficient. So thanks everyone for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
That was a great job there, Sinead. Very impressive presentation all the same.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for
Very
listening.
well delivered as well, now, I must admit. I suppose one of the questions I'd be looking at is, fantastic piece of new technology. removing people from a dangerous environment.
Yeah.
What about the cost, the time required? When you compare the traditional methods of tank cleaning,
Yeah.
what about the cost and the time involved? Is it comparable or?
Yeah.
If you want, Sinead, I'll jump in. I'm Fintan Duffy's my name, just for anyone that doesn't know me, but I see most of the faces and I know most of them.
Brilliant, Fintan.
I'm the MD of Regen Robotics. Time-wise, David, as they were about 45% faster across the board. Now, that's not to say there's some tanks we would be up to 70% faster.
Wow.
Than man entry, and it just depends, swings and roundabouts with different types of tanks and different material in the tanks, and depending on what PPE. If you're going into a chemical tank, you need a hell of a lot more PPE than into an oil tank. So, it's averaging out around 45% faster. Cost-wise, we're probably slightly more expensive. Now, having said that, we arrive on site with £1.5 million worth of equipment. It's not a car and a box of Smarties in it. So it's slightly more expensive. Having said that, you're cutting down the man hours on site. Everyone knows it's a simple fact. The more man hours you have on site, especially high risk confined spaces, the more man hours you have, the more likelihood you have of having an accident. So overall, what we're finding is customers are coming back to us because they don't need a spade tanks, and they're starting to look at the overall cost of a tank clean now, which is the mechanical works that has to be done in preparation for confined space entry. The length of time their tank is out of service, we're actually working out more efficient than a confined space entry crew overall. If you just took the comparison of the people going in and the kit they have compared to us, yes, we're more expensive. If you look at the overall project, we're way more efficient.
Fantastic. Onwards and upwards with it. No, that's brilliant.
Thanks, guys. I have a question for either Sinead or Fintan. And it works obviously very well on oil tanks where there's a fairly low lip just as you go into the tank. What about tanks where the entry point is higher up? How does the robot cope with getting into tanks which have got a bit more of a drop on the inside? And then also, how does it cope with solid materials as opposed to the liquid residue from an oil tank?
I suppose we'll take the first question, Jim. The first thing is, like on the majority of tanks we've been into, the man-weight door would be up around between 900 and 1200 up off the floor. So we have a ramp system that we put in from outside the tank. We can slide our ramp system in. It's hydraulically operated, so we can adjust the angle of the ramps. When we put them in flat, and we can hook them on, and we can adjust the angle of the ramps to depending on the height that we'll have to get back down inside. So we haven't come across anything yet that we can't get into. Sometimes on the outside of the tank, the site would need a bit of scaffold access for a ramp outside because the ground maybe is too low outside, or the ground's not suitable for the ramps outside. So that's what we do on the outside of the tank. Inside the tank, the manway lids is generally between half a meter and a meter off the floor, so we can work with the inside. Then the next question you're asking, and we didn't have it in the thing, but we can send it around again anyway. We have an auger system for the front of the robotic equipment. So basically what you have is you have a big auger with, it's a copper auger, so there's no chance of sparks with it, and it's spinning around and it'll cut up heavy sludge and just feeds it in. If you take probably the best example of something I could give you would be the auger on the front of a silage harvester or a combine harvester, where it's just cutting the stuff up as it's meeting it and it's feeding it into the suction pipe in the center. So again, with heavy fuel oil or anything, we'd use the auger system. There's a bit of a toss-up to be had with how fast you want to take the material out. If you want to take the material out fast, even if it's heavy sludge that's caked up 2 or 3 foot high in the tank, you can take it out fast by using jetting. So we can cut it with the jets as well as the auger. The jets will cut it up into big lumps, and the auger will break it up into finer pieces for sucking up. If you want to take it out slowly and dry, it all depends on what's happening with the waste afterwards. So some sites are treating the waste on site, some sites are exporting it. We tend not to get into that because our equipment it's basically for working on site. It's the tanker is not for haulage, so we tend not to get into the disposal of the waste. We leave that with the customer, or we'll manage it for them, but in any event they organize the disposal of it. So if the customer can take it out wet and fast, if they're treating it on site, if it's going for export, to keep the cost down of export, we take it out as dry as possible.
All right, great. Thanks very much indeed. I could ask questions all afternoon. That wouldn't be fair. So anybody else would like to chip in here?
I think it's that time of the day. It's the afternoon slump that you got them on, Jim.
Could well be.
John, can you hear me? It's Mark here.
I could hear someone, but
Nah, my microphone's not great. Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Yes.
What about baffles or heating elements on the floor of the tank and things like that?
So like we work round a lot of the heating coils. Basically, if we can get down between the heating coils, we have offset suction heads that'll reach in under them, and then we have a 360 jetting head that basically we'll start on one side of the tank, and we'll, like, say if we go down the center of the tank and start cleaning there, we'll work from the center over to the right, and then come back to the center and work over to the left. So we'll just keep going up and down between the heating coils, and as we're doing that, we'll keep jetting the sludge on over into the next section that we can get at. As I say, we've also an offset suction head that'll reach in under them. It's only 150 mil in depth, so it can reach in under anything that's over 150 mil. It can reach in under it and clean that. It can work about 800 off the edge of the robot, from 800 out from the side of the robot.
Very good, thanks.
I must have been a wee bit like what Jim said there. Geez, plenty of questions you could ask all day. I mean, one of the things that interested me there, Fintan, was that your guys all go through confined spaces. In the rare occasion, mechanical failure, you might have to rescue the robot. Has it happened yet? Have you had to do it?
Will we be honest, or will we tell the company line, David? We have had, look, we do train the guys, because look, the bottom line of it is it's new technology. Nobody has done it before. Regen Robotics have cleaned the first tank for Shell worldwide with no man entry, and when I say no man entry, I mean 100% no man entry. So that's something that Shell are quite proud of to have done, and we're certainly proud to have been the company to brought that to fruition. We have had mechanical failures, yes, with the robot. We have never had to get into the tank to take it out. We've had two occasions where we've had, one of them was an issue with the tracks on the robot, that it snapped one of the tracks on the robot, and it actually snapped the second one before we got it out of the tank. But we brought it out of the tank basically using a winch from outside. We attached a sling onto the umbilical cord coming out through the door, and we pulled the robot back over. The reason our guys, and the second time it was a hydraulic failure, but we put the robot into freewheel and brought it out of the tank that way. The reason we have confined space training for all our guys is that has worked in we're just about 18 months or that in operation at the minute, and it has worked the two times we've had to take it out. That's not to say that in a floating roof tank, you have, like say in a 30-meter floating roof diameter tank, you could have 80 legs that you're working around. So if the robot is in round some of the legs, and the umbilical cord and the suction hose is caught around some of the legs, if we needed to get it back out and it wasn't under its own power, we would have to go into the tank and remove the hoses. Having said that, as opposed to putting people into a tank for 3 weeks cleaning it, we may have to put someone in for 5 minutes to take suction hose away from around a leg.
How many people does it take to go out and operate it then? How many people would be there on site? You know, were there any issues?
We generally have 3 people, between 2 and 3 people. You can, it's useful to have a third person for when we're moving from one tank to another, just for gathering up hoses and everything like that. But as a rule of thumb, it's two people. It's one on the tanker and one on the robotic system.
All right.
How do you get a job for controlling the robots? Is there many of those jobs going, Fintan?
Yeah, believe it or not, it's one of the things, and it's not something I could do all day, sit in front of a screen and drive it. But I wouldn't mind sitting in a digger. It's fairly similar controls to a 360 excavator. I'd have no problem sitting doing that all day, but sitting watching screens all day, it's a certain type of person that can do it. And I suppose we're finding that we're having more success with younger people that are more used to sitting at screens all day, where if you had, we've had fellas that you know, it didn't suit them insofar as they're used to more doing manual work, and sitting down at a screen for 8 hours in the day and driving a robot, they kind of tend to get bored. You see, by lunchtime, they're kind of coming out for a walk more often than they're working the robot.
Where I was going with that was obviously if you're working on an oil terminal or something like that, where there's a flammable material, then you need a certain type of person who is going to be focused on the job as opposed to somebody who is more casual, shall we say. Absolutely.
And look, we have it costs us about, when we take on someone before we can put them on site, it costs us about £5,500 between wages and training, the time it takes to train them. You have about 5 weeks before we can send someone on site because we have that much training to do. We get their confined space with a safety passport alliance, which is for working on petroleum sites. Some sites look for the CCNSG. We have the crane training, manual handling training, with all that to go through. So it takes us about £5,500 just to train a guy. So it's not something that we take in people and just to try them for a few weeks, because we have a lot of investment put into them by the time the first set foot on site. And it is the type of industry. It's not an industry of second chances. You know, if you do something wrong once, there's major consequences to it. So you have to have a certain level of people doing it. And again, because it's away from home, like 97% of our work is away from home. So you have to have guys that's comfortable being away from home, and guys that's used to being away from home, because that's going to be the job. And like we're with guys down in London at the minute, they'll be finishing up a job. They're coming home to do what I call it coming home. They're coming home to do a job in Mayo, and then they're back out to a job over in Grimsby. So it's never the type of thing that you're going to be at home doing.
Yeah. Okay, folks. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I might just check with Fintan. Hi, Fintan. My name's Elaine. I'm assuming this, I'm just trying to build an impression of this type of cleaning. I'm assuming this type of cleaning is for very much heavy duty, large confined spaces, as opposed to we have several pieces of equipment here on site that we need to send men into. Now they're only been sent in for 30 minutes at a time, but they've been sent in quite regularly, which is once or twice a week. And I'm assuming this type of robot cleaning would not be suitable for that type of sort of ongoing general maintenance. But I'm wondering, in the future, would there be any plans to develop this in such a way that that's something that we could do?
It certainly would, Elaine, and I suppose not the equipment that we're using, because it's obviously it's long duration stuff that it's more suited to. Now, when I say long duration, there's some of the tanks we do and we clean them in 2 days, anything between that and 6 months, depending on what's in the tank. But I suppose, is it vertical vessels that you're talking about that they're going into?
Both, it's horizontal and vertical.
If you want to take that conversation offline and send me a few details on it. It's not to say that it might be for our robotic equipment, but I'll definitely point you in the direction. And look, there's plenty of jobs customers have come to us with that doesn't suit our equipment. I'll tell you what does suit it, because what we have found from we have started this journey, there's very few things that you can't do with robotics or some kind of no-man entry. It's just down to having the appetite to look into it and to investigate it and to try new things. There's a lot of things you can get now, like what they call manway cannons and spinning jets and everything else that you can put into a tank without the need to put anyone in. You can put them in, you can put a camera in with them, you can do the work, and you can probably cut down. I'm not saying they're no man entry, but you can probably cut it down by 95% that somebody needs to just go in and maybe check something or do a final clean. The big thing about that is you have the gas gone out of the tank. If you can move all the heavy sludge and put a suction hose in without the need to get in, you can get all the gas out of the tank. It's still a confined space, but there's no hazard in there anymore. You've removed the gas. So if you want to contact me, I'll absolutely look at any vessels you have, and I'll see what we can come up with.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
And if you do want to take us to sit on site all week, we have absolutely no issue with that.
I would say not.
No. As the old saying goes, if you have the money, I have the time.
The purse strings are tight in most companies, I would think.
I know. I hear that old chestnut all the time.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Benton.
No problem. Thank you.
Very good, folks. Any last chance here now? Any questions? They've all gone quiet, Fenton.
Yeah, that's fine.
That means you've answered all. That means you've answered all the questions.
Hopefully.
So look, thanks to Fenton. Thanks, Sinead.
Thank you.
Good job. Well done. Good presentation. Very interesting. Look forward to seeing it in the future again too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
All the best, guys. Good luck.
Just on that, Jim, just one last thing. If anyone does want to come and see our equipment, contact Sinead or myself, and we'll bring you down. We'll bring you to a site and see it in action. We don't do a lot locally, but when things change, if anyone's looking at a trip to the UK or further afield, give us a shout. We've no problem showing any of the equipment in action.
That's good. Better seen than told.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Great job. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you.
Good. Going to move on to the next person on the agenda. Now, Gavin, are you here somewhere?
I am, Jim. Yes, thank you.
Good man. Gavin Kane from Quadra.
Hello.
I'll leave you to introduce yourself and your topic, Gavin, and all the best.
Okay, Jim, look, I'll just share screen here and pop this presentation up. Hopefully that'll... Y'all got that okay, yeah?
Yep.
That displaying okay? All right, look, thanks. And thanks to Rachel for the invite to come along and talk you through this. So look, I've been asked to do a brief presentation to you today on the ISO 45001 standard, which is an international standard for health and safety management, a standard available for certification. And if you think back to the presentation done by Regen a while ago, you'll see that Sinead had put a slide up with three logos across it, and ISO 45000 was one of those logos. So I'm just going to talk you through some topics in relation to that. And what I'm going to do is take you through a bit of an introduction, talk to you a bit about the standard, discuss a little bit about whether or not it's worth the effort in practice. I'm not here in any way to try and convince you that it's the only option in terms of health and safety management systems. It's one of the options available, and there are others, and we'll talk about that as well. And then we'll talk, I suppose, at the end just about some of the benefits that you may achieve from using a standard like that. As part of the sort of discussion, I'd asked Rachel to maybe, if you like, speak to people and find out if there was any particular topics they wanted to cover in relation to ISO 45001. Nothing came back, so I've taken the assumption that some people in the session may already have the standard, and others in the session may not have it in place or may be considering it. So I'm going to try and cover both of those angles and give you both sides of that. So look, a little bit of a brief introduction. This is not so much about us, but it's just to give you an idea of where we're coming from. We've been involved in the field of ISO standards now for 30 years. This is actually our 30th year in business. And effectively, we specialize in a range of core ISO management system standards. And I suppose at the core of all of those is risk management. Again, go back to the slides Sinead had up. She had a health and safety standard, an environmental standard, and a quality standard. And those are some of the most common management system standards that organizations decide to implement. And again, we've worked quite extensively over the years within the waste industry, both within, if you like, sort of waste processors, recycling organizations, and also with some of the local authorities and councils in terms of their management systems and civic amenity sites and so on, north and south of the border. So just to give you a bit of background in terms of where we're coming from. So like, I suppose the standard itself, we're going to talk a wee bit about what does it focus on, what are the potential benefits, and again we will talk about are there any drawbacks, because for some organizations it might not be the best way to go forward, and it's important to recognize that and not place a sort of square peg in a round hole. I suppose is the important point. So we'll just take a pretty frank look at it and take a look at both sides of the argument in terms of whether or not it's something that's beneficial or should be considered. So look, what is the standard? It's an internationally recognized standard, and again, sorry, Sinead, I keep going back to your presentation, but just in terms of relevance, and it's something Fintan said as well. You know, the reason a company like Regen would consider standards like that, first of all, they want to improve risk management and they want to make it better. But I suppose increasingly what they probably find is that organizations, the likes of Shell that was mentioned, may well have things like this as a precondition in terms of actually getting on their supply chain. There's been a big focus on supply chain risk management, and a lot of big organizations are putting it in as a condition in terms of working with them that you may need standards like ISO 45001 in place. So it's built with that in mind, and it's built as an internationally recognized standard that is basically the same across the world. The only difference in the standard when you go and look at it in different regions is the language that it's published in. it's focused very much on a proactive approach to managing occupational health and safety. And that's something we're going to talk about quite a bit as we go through the session. And it's about the idea of trying to take a very sort of, if you like, a very sort of reactive way of doing things and trying to turn it into a much more proactive, systematic, positive approach. And basically, it's, as I've said before, it's a global solution. It's a global standard, and it's developed with that in mind. And again, it is one of those things. It's available for certification. And what that means, and we'll talk about this a bit later on in the session, is that organisations can actually go forward for external audit against this standard. They can, if they wish, achieve certification to it. You may not wish to do that. You may wish to just use the standard as a basis for developing your system and not go forward for certification. But again, we'll talk about that as options and what you might consider doing with it moving forward. But it is available for certification and is certificated by independent bodies who come in and audit you against the requirements. And if they're satisfied you meet the requirements, they issue certification against the standard, which can be very useful for a number of reasons that we'll come to. I suppose ISO 45001 is the third child in this family, if you like, in terms of ISO standards. Most organizations, when they think about ISO standards, historically would have started off implementing a quality system around ISO 9001, which is down in the bottom left here. And then historically, the next standard to develop was ISO 14001, the environmental management system, because it was a sort of glowing requirement for organizations to be able to put systems in place to manage their environmental credentials. And then ISO 45001 came along. ISO 45001 came from a number of different sources, but any of you who heard the term OHSAS 18001 will understand that it basically replaced that standard, and that standard that specification took a step up a level, if you like, and that it became a sort of a globally harmonized standard. And what most organizations do nowadays is that they tend to implement, typically up to 3 of those standards in one integrated management system. So they'll try and take them and build them into one system. And there's a lot of positives with that and a lot of benefits. And you can see some of the synergy in the center of the diagram here, which shows that if you have something like 9001 in place or 14001 in place, you will already have some of the fundamental requirements of ISO 45001 addressed. And it's simply a matter of putting some health and safety content on those. The other big sort of factor to consider is that, having all 3 of these standards in place really, if you like, embeds those principles within the business. And if you take the likes of health and safety management and wrap that up with a quality and environmental management system, it gives a real sort of effective combined approach to risk management. And there's a lot of synergy between the standards, but it's also important to recognize that there are differences, and 45001 in itself will bring elements specifically in relation to health and safety management that need to be covered. And if you think about some of the sort of common elements that it might cover, obvious areas like purchasing, when organizations go to purchase equipment or plant or whatever it might be, that can have implications in terms of the quality. It can have implications in terms of environment, but probably most importantly, it can have implications in terms of health and safety management. And what standards like this do is that they help embed these things within the business in terms of processes, and help basically help the organizations develop processes that if you're going off to purchase something, it's not just about purchasing the cheapest option. It's about trying to consider and, if you like, design out some of the risks from the very, very start, and try and really go back to those principles of eliminating hazards from the start of the process. So there's a lot to be had from integration. That said, they don't have to be integrated. Many organizations will keep them separate for their own reasons. And again, many organizations will simply use these standards as guidelines. They'll not go forward for certification. They just take them and adopt the best practice contained within them. So again, go back to the slides and you'd had up, Regen had implemented all 3 of those standards and achieved certification of those standards. And I suppose that's the, if you like, the visual result of these things, the ability to be able to demonstrate that certification to supply chain. So I suppose the obvious question for some organizations is, do you actually need it? What is it going to bring to the table? What difference is it going to make, if any? And a lot of that depends on the current approach. And some organizations may well have developed their own very robust, systematic way of managing health and safety that doesn't require the likes of 45001. So if this is something that you don't have, I think the starting point is for you to consider, how good is your current approach? Second thing to consider then is, does it work? And that can be evidenced by a number of different factors in terms of lead indicators and lag indicators. But it's really about sort of looking at your current system and trying to assess, is it effective? Does it work for you? And again, how do we know that it works? Okay, because the big thing that comes out of systems like 45001 is that it provides a very, very high degree of visibility in terms of occupational health and safety performance. It'll require you to look at a systematic and very proactive way of doing things, and it'll require you to put in place metrics and indicators that give you an idea of whether or not your current systems are working. A lot of organizations that we go into for the first time that don't have these standards struggle with their current approach. They find that it's not really working, and they find that they have no visibility. There's an assumption that the system is effective. There's an assumption that it's working. And unfortunately, when it comes down to accidents or incidents, that's often when they find out that it didn't work. It broke down in some sort of way, whether that was poor risk assessment, poor planning, poor training, whatever it might have been. So it really sort of turns things on its head. It's based around the sort of Deming cycle, the plan, do, check, act mechanism. And again, the sort of ethos and the idea behind that is when you're developing this system, you start with the planning bit. In other words, you get an understanding of the organization and its risks. So it starts with that sort of very fundamental, using the risk assessment as a basis, and it asks you to identify and assess those risks. It then asks you to build a system to manage those risks and to implement that system. And it then asks you to check that system is working and to take action where it's not. So traditionally, organizations might be good at the planning and to a certain degree at the doing bit, but when it comes around to the checking and the action bit, that's where we find that there are weaknesses in unstructured systems. So it really brings that sort of concept of continual improvement to the fore. This just gives you an idea of how the standard fits into the plan, do, check, act mechanism, and that you've got those 4 quadrants in the circle, and within the center of that, you've got the various clauses of ISO 45001 reference within there, and you can see at the heart of that, there's the whole idea of leadership and also worker participation. And that was very, very fundamental in the move from 18,001 to 45,001. They wanted to build a sort of a structure and a system which focused the organization from a leadership perspective. In other words, engagement from the senior management of the organization, trying to develop a culture and trying to develop commitment at the top, and also at the other end, trying to make sure that there was effective channels in place for employee communication and consultation. The idea being that if it was being approached from both angles, it should result in a much more improved safety management structure and a safety management culture. Okay, so as I said earlier on, there are many different options in terms of things that you can use. On the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see I've sort of noted down the sort of common clauses of HSG 65, which you'll all be aware of. Beside that, I've then mapped across the clauses of ISO 45001, and then on the right-hand side of the slide, what I'm trying to do there is to give you an idea of if we're asked to go into an organization for the first time and look at its management system and try and work out how good or effective it is. That's traditionally what we find. Now, I'll stick on the left for a second. You can see that 45,001 and HSG 65 are both sort of based on the plan, do, check, act mechanism, okay, which is a very, very important point. And again, as I said earlier, 45,001 is not the only option. HSG 65 is a tried, tested, robust, very effective approach, and something that you can avail of on the internet. You can download a copy from the HSE website, and you may well decide to use that as your system. And again, some organizations may well decide to take that further, and having done that, maybe build 45,001 requirements on top of that. That is, if they wish to go to the point of certification and they wish to go to the point of external audit. So a lot of similarities between those two methods, if you like, 65 and ISO 45001. So again, just I suppose briefly on the right hand side, what you'll see here, as I've said, is when we go into an organization, typically first thing we do is a sort of gap analysis against the requirements to try and get an idea of how well the current system lines up. And when we look down some of those requirements in relation to sort of context and so on, we find that organizations traditionally don't do that very well. A lot of organizations end up with risk assessments and safe systems of work that have come from elsewhere, or they've inherited from somewhere else, or they may have seen somewhere else and they look good and they adopt those. It's not the case across the board. It's the case in some instances. So we traditionally find that around the sort of context and the planning phases, organizations require a lot of work. They require a lot of improvement to sort of step up and meet the requirements. When we get down into the sort of doing section, again, we find that things are generally okay, but there is some room for improvement. But we really start to see the sort of effort needing to come in when it comes in and around the sort of the check and the action phases, as I've said earlier on. The plan and the do bits are traditionally okay, but the checking and the action bits are where we find significant weaknesses. So again, that's just to give you an idea of how those things map across, and the idea that 45,001 is not the only option. So what does it bring in terms of approach? You know, what difference does it actually make? From a risk assessment point of view, we see a big difference in organizations, in that you find a much more enhanced and a much more comprehensive approach to risk assessment. You see organizations getting right back to basics in terms of elimination and hierarchy of control. You see organizations really taking a much more systematic approach and trying to, and I suppose, identifying hazards and assessing risks for the first time that they've had for a while, but they just didn't know they had, if that makes sense. We see a much better understanding of compliance obligations. Within 45,001, there's a requirement to understand your compliance obligations. So what does that mean in practice? It means not only your legal obligations, but it also means other things. It can mean conditions of your insurance, for example, or things which place compliance obligations on you. If you're a member of an industry body or a professional association, they may well have requirements. And traditionally what we find is that organizations don't have a full understanding of those. They don't really understand them. I need to make an important point here. Having 45,001 is not a guarantee of legal compliance. It's not in any way going to guarantee you comply with the law. It's really, really important to make that point. But what it does do is it forces you in a position whereby it asks you to become, I suppose, more aware of that, have a better understanding of it, and to check yourself against it. Again, it moves from a much more of a sort of a less reactive approach, where you're on the back foot all of the time, to much more of a proactive approach in terms of managing things like change, managing things like introduction of new equipment. And I was just thinking when I saw the safety bulletin come through last week that Rachel had sent out in relation to the incident that ConExpo put up. Again, with a system, what does that mean? It means it's much more likely that something like that is going to come into the organization and be managed in a proactive way, instead of just sitting in someone's email and maybe not being communicated out. Because within the likes of 45,001, there are mechanisms in there which encourage you to take those things and manage them proactively. So again, what else does it mean from a performance point of view? Traditionally, it means improved metrics. And again, something I've spoken about sort of in the earlier slides. There's a requirement in the standard to sort of, if you like, assess the effectiveness of your system. And again, how do you do that? You can only assess the effectiveness of your system if you've got some sort of measures in place. All right. And again, an assurance. Okay. So from a number of perspectives, it can give, if you like, senior management within an organization more visibility and more assurance that the safety management system is actually being implemented and is effective, and the indicators can help prove that. But also for potential customers and so on, it can give a heightened degree of assurance if they see that you've got a certification like this in place and you've gone to the trouble of having the external audit as well. Right. So in practice, what does it mean in terms of real benefits? As I've said before, we see a real enhanced risk assessment process in place, and as a result, we see much better risk assessments being developed, taking into account factors that maybe the organization hadn't considered before or hadn't properly addressed. Property issues like Legionella and asbestos and those sorts of things that maybe aren't traditionally that well managed. Improve coverage of things like fire, improve coverage of things like workplace traffic, whatever it might be. As you said, compliance obligations as well. It really focuses the organization on those. And an audit we did with a company recently, we started to build a compliance mechanism for them, and they realized for the first time that there was a 10-meter exclusion zone within their insurance policy in relation to fire. They hadn't done that before. They didn't know to look for it. Traditionally, they just renewed your insurance with the same provider every year and didn't get into the detail of the policy. So again, they found a potentially a huge vulnerability in their system just because they were forced to look at their compliance obligations much more closely. Again, we do find that it does help drive that sort of culture of working safely and a much more positive culture. If you think back to what I said earlier on about the leadership and commitment bit, and also the increased emphasis on worker participation, you find that improves and becomes better over time. And again, traditionally, not all cases, but in a lot of cases, we see a much more proactive approach to sort of near miss hazard reporting, safety suggestions, that sort of thing coming through, because it's a much more robust system. It's something that's audited internally, so people pay a bit more attention to it and feel a bit more obliged to comply with those processes. So what's the process? If you do go off and you do ask yourself those questions around how effective is my current system? Is it right? Is it working? Do I need to do something about it? Do I need to consider 45,001? Traditionally, the starting point is a gap analysis whereby you'd measure your current arrangements against the likes of HSC 65 or against the requirements of 45,001. You'll then take whatever comes out of that gap analysis and develop a management system which is structured around that plan, do, check, act approach. You'll then obviously implement that system and build evidence and compliance with it and train people in it and make them aware of it. And again, you can see how this differentiates from just having a normal standard health and safety policy. It brings that greater degree of implementation. And again, if you decide that you're going to go for something like certification, there'll be a requirement to do an internal audit, not only prior to certification, but an internal audit on an ongoing basis, whereby you'll be asked to sort of, if you like, police your system and check that it's been implemented and check that it's effective. And if required, you may decide to go for external certification with a, if you like, a UCAS approved certification body who will have a license for issuing certificates against the standard. So that's a sort of standard approach to doing this. And how long does it take? I suppose that depends a lot what comes out of your gap analysis, and it depends a lot in terms of how robust your current system is. So I mentioned a few bodies involved in this, and it's just to help clarify this. So you've got an organization like yourself, and Sinead, I'll just use Regen if you don't mind. So what was the aim of Regen when they implemented? To improve, obviously, but to achieve certification ultimately. You were assessed by a certification body. I think it was SCS, was your certification body that displayed on the logos. Their job is to come in and audit your organization against the requirements of 45001 and assess whether or not it complies. And then you've got the accreditation body. So they're a body that exists and sit above the certification body. And if you like, they police the certification bodies to try and make sure that they're doing it properly and they're doing it right. And one thing I would say is that if you are going to go for certification, try and make sure you always go down the route of having a properly accredited certification body, because if you don't, it'll just be a waste of time for you. Okay. So I suppose the question is it worth the effort? I suppose in many ways it can depend a lot on your scale and in terms of the size of the organization. Might not be appropriate for small organizations, and I know there's been some discussion and some concerns about maybe the level of bureaucracy and the level of paperwork that a standard like 45001 might bring, and that can be the case. It depends on what way your system is written and what way your system is developed. So if you're in the smaller end of the scale, you may not need the certification, and there may be no benefit in going for it. Depend a lot on your resources as well, in terms of what sort of time, effort, and commitment you can allocate to it. And again, if you find that your scale and your resources don't justify it, there's still no reason why you can't use it as a guideline. There's still no reason why you can't use it as a basis for developing your system. You might just not go forward for certification. I suppose again, it depends a lot on your risk profile and the type of environment that you work in. And and again, the higher the risk, the more the hazards, potentially the more benefit you can achieve from a system like this. And again, it will depend a lot on the drivers, why you want to do something like this. Again, as I've said, the fundamental reason should always be to try and build a robust and effective health and safety management system. But if you do find yourself in an environment whereby your customers are potentially demanding these things off you, then it may well be a solution, and it may well help in many ways with tendering criteria and so on. Okay, so I suppose, what do you do next? As I've said, I think that the idea is look at your current approach, think about some of the things we've said and discussed in the presentation here today. Have a look at the likes of HSG 65, have a look at the likes of 45001, and I suppose check out where you think they may line up or they may not line up. And that will then help you drive a decision as to whether or not you think it's beneficial to take the next step and move towards something like 45001. Okay, so look, it's a big standard, it's a complex standard, there's a lot in it. And I suppose I just wanted to try and pitch it at the right level and pick out some of the fundamental and the key points. So thanks for that. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to do my best to answer them.
Yep. Thank you, Gavin. I'll just open the floor here now, or the machine, to any questions that are on the go.
Gavin, do you think you're at an advantage from wanting to introduce 45001 if you already have 9000 and 14001?
Yeah, I mean, it provides a real sort of fundamental starting point, if you like, because I mean, all standards are now based on XSL, which basically structured them all the same way. And if you look at the contents page of all three, you'll find there are 10 sections, and they're all very similar headings. So 9001 and 14001 would probably take about 40% of the requirements in 45001 and address those automatically, albeit that you've obviously got to put the health and safety element into those. Things like document control, audits, corrective action, you already have mechanisms for those. It's just a matter of putting a safety angle into them.
Okay.
So it's a great help.
Fair enough.
Is the 18001 completely finished now? I mean, have all companies who had 18,001, should they have been through their transition period by now, 45,001?
They give a slight extension on it, Justine, because of what was going on in the world. But
Okay.
there are very few organisations left at this minute in time who I think would have an 18,001 certificate still in place. Because the certification bodies were really pushing to get all that transferred across for obvious reasons. They would lose the certificates basically. I'd be amazed if there's anybody left at this stage, but I could be wrong in that.
Gavin, can I ask a question just in terms of the current pandemic, and obviously a lot of things are being done virtually, and we had our virtual audits actually last week, and I found them like really sort of, they were on the receiving end, they were a lot more difficult, very intense, and because a lot of the time the auditor can pick a lot up, you know, just from chatting to staff on the ground, and they can get a real feel, you know, for the place, and whether it's, you know, what kind of with ethos. So just from the auditor's point of view, have you found like difficulties, or even on the flip side, have you found any real like innovation by companies to get round this, you know, the whole virtual world, and things like frontline staff working on the front line and management working at home, and, you know, just have you come across any innovation that, you know, that can be shared?
Well, look, it's been very challenging, you know, there's no doubt about that, you know, and I honestly think that, you know, it's standards like 9,001, you can audit those remotely probably forever, you know, and you might find a lot of certification bodies will stay that way. But I think when it comes down to these standards whereby, you know, you're looking at risk, you need to be on the ground, and you need to be able to see, and you need to be able to speak to people, and you need to be able to observe, you know. I've had auditors who have asked for, you know, safety tours on sort of video and stuff like that, you know. They only see what you want them to see, to be honest, you know. So I think the effectiveness of those audits in the short term has to be questioned, and I doubt they'll continue like that moving forward, because I don't. It takes away from the credibility of the thing, if that makes sense. And I've sat through some which have been probably even more challenging, to be honest, than they would have been if they were on site, because they can. An auditor can see on site, they can see the layout, they can see traffic being managed effectively, they get a feel for things. Whereas if they're sitting on the other end of a screen, that degree of assurance isn't immediately there. So they maybe probe and challenge a wee bit more. So look, the certification bodies were a bit slow at getting moving in terms of how they approached it. And some have done it really well and some have done it not so well, I have to say. So I probably can't point to one of them as being the best in terms of a most innovative approach, but I think they'll be working hard to try and turn it around and get back on site as quickly as they can.
Yeah, but even in terms of the people, you know, the organizations being audited, have you found any real sort of like things to do with like COVID-19 control measures and getting around things? Have you found any real good examples there?
You mean in terms of how they're managing the risk?
Yeah.
Well, look, I suppose every industry is different, you know. And you know, there are no sort of shining examples that jump out to me, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, we've still been getting out of organisations and doing some audits, if you like, you know, on site where we're allowed to and where we can and within the guidelines. And look, there's nothing that jumps out to me as a shining example that I would say they've done it really well, to be perfectly honest. I think it's everybody's struggling to. I think the point at this stage is everybody's struggling to keep compliance with the control measures. Yeah. Because people have just had enough of it now in many ways, you know, and that's not the right thing to say, but that's just the way it is. So I think the battle for them now is they spent a lot of money putting controls and screens and signage and that stuff in place, but people are tired now, you know, and it's the big challenge for them is keeping the momentum up. So sorry, I can't give you a shining light there, but.
Want to steal other people's idea, because I think that's probably why I'm asking the question. It's this sort of COVID fatigue almost setting in, and it's just, if there are, you know, we're always sort of looking out for new ways to sort of refresh the information and to keep it at, you know, kind of like now you just have to keep reminding, you know, staff and how do you find new ways to sort of make it relevant. But
yeah, look, I mean, you know, I've been dealing with sort of a case recently where the thing that really changed people's minds was a positive case.
Yeah.
Because up until that point in this work environment, there hadn't been any, and people were becoming really blasé about it. And all of a sudden, there's a case, and you start talking about close contacts, and people start to go, "Well, this is real. You know, that this is real." And I was working with that person yesterday. Does that mean I'm a close contact? And I think at that stage, then you see all of a sudden people come back to their masks and back to their hand sanitizer. But again, you're probably going to get that for a while. So it's fatigue. It's fatigue, you know, and I can understand that and I can see that, but we just need to keep at it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Talking about that fatigue there, and on that note, dealing with a company, obviously not saying their name, but they were having an awful lot of issues with employees violating the company rules in terms of wearing masks, and they were actually having to, you know, hold disciplinary meetings, and I do believe it led to a couple of dismissals. But what actually then came from it was that they ended up having a cluster in the workplace. The workplaces actually had to shut down, and last I heard they had 30 positive cases. So it just emphasises the need to keep reinforcing it amongst the workforce and try and not let that fatigue set in, because it does have consequences.
Absolutely, you know, that's the big challenge, Justine. I think, you know, and you can see it yourself when you go into the shop nowadays. You know, the number of people who have peeled away from wearing masks. You know, in the local shop to me. Sometimes they go and there's a guy checking people in the way and giving them a spray in their hands, and other times there's not. You know, it's just it's inconsistent application in many cases is the problem.
Yeah.
You must be shopping in similar places to me, Gavin, for it's exactly the same in Newcastle.
Yeah, Jim, it's
Miss.
you know, yeah, it's hit and miss. It's hit and miss. That's the problem. You know, that's the problem. But
Well,
not sure what we
it's
can
going
do.
to be with us for another while. So, folks, as we said the last meeting, keep taking the hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
If there's any more questions for Gavin, I could take them now. Otherwise, Gavin, that was a job well done.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks very much for.
Thank you so much for doing that.
No problem. You're more than welcome.
And I'm just going to cue Rachel now, and Rachel's going to talk to us very briefly about the. Sorry, I tell a lie. Justine is going to give us an update from HSE, and then Rachel is going to about
just a couple of points from me, Jim, this meeting. So first thing, following from the presentation that Claire and David did from the Mental Health and Wellbeing Group, we have secured a date for the 25th of May. And what we will be doing is running a mental health workshop for WISHNI members. So that's going to be limited to around 25 people, and the workshop will last for about 2.5 hours. So we'll be looking at the management standards, but then we'll try and get some sort of practical guidance as to how you might deal with or signpost an employee who comes to you with any kind of stress or, you know, mental health issue. So hopefully there'll be good interest in that. As we said, we're continuing to respond to COVID-19 complaints. We have one cluster which I spoke there briefly about. Interestingly, the company have said that they can track that back to car sharing. So maybe something to look at within your organisations. It's hard to control what people do outside of work. And then in terms of enforcement action, we haven't been out doing that many proactive inspections. As I say, it is mainly responding to complaints and any incidents that happen. I have had to issue 2 enforcement notices at the date of the last meeting. One of those was a prohibition notice that was issued for working at height. So my reminder would be that the bucket of an excavator is not a suitable working platform to inspect the top of waste stockpiles. Please do get alternative safe access. And the second then was an improvement notice for all round visibility. So making sure your mirrors, your cameras, etc. are all functioning on any mobile plant that you have on site. So in terms of that workshop I was talking about, we'll get invitations sent out later in the year. I know it's May, but it'll not take too long coming in. And then depending on how many people we have signed up for it, if we need to run a further workshop, then we will.
Just one question on that one, Justine, at the moment. Are we thinking about limiting spaces, you know, so many places per company? 25
well,
seats.
in terms of the quarry one, we haven't really limited spaces. We've just kind of took it as just see what has come in, really. I mean, there's been some companies who have had 3, you know, people from the company attend it. So it'll depend really on the interest.
First come, first served.
Well, if it comes to that, we maybe will reduce it a bit just to make sure that everyone has a fair chance to get someone from their company. But if numbers were that high, we would run a second workshop. The reason we have to limit numbers is because they do use breakout groups and polls, and we try and have it as interactive as possible. And sometimes that can get lost, or can't be as easily done whenever you have large amounts of people. But if you don't get on the first workshop, we will run a second one.
Great. Brilliant. Any questions for Justine? I'm really surprised that the bucket of an excavator is still being used as a.
So was I when I arrived on site. It's not anymore, Tim. I don't think.
The word hasn't changed. Great. No questions for Justine? Thank you so much for doing that for us.
Thank you.
Over to Rachel just for a moment or two.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Basically, we just wanted to share a proposal for the idea of how we're going to present the Ambassador Awards this year and get some feedback from you guys on what your feelings are surrounding it. Obviously, given the COVID situation this year, we've decided to postpone the actual overall awards until the end of the latter half of this year. Obviously, with the students, that's not going to suit them because their academic year is obviously September to June, so that would mean that they would miss out on that. So what we've decided to do to try and address that is that we're going to hold a Student Ambassador Award solely focused on just the students this year. And we're hoping to host that in, was it April or June? I think we'd agreed, April, the latter half of April. And we have kindly Robert from the HSE, he's obviously going to host the awards, and the invite will be extended to the all of the year groups doing environmental health as well. So it won't be just the second year students, it will hopefully be all of the students. And we're hoping to promote this event as much as possible, which is where we kind of need the help of everybody. We're going to ask that we get as much publicity through the socials. Obviously, it's going to be held virtually, so I'm not too sure whether that will mean more attendees or less attendees, but we're hoping to use the LinkedIn page and obviously the HSCNI website. And we're also going to ask that our members would, if they could kindly promote it as well in their own socials, to try and get the word out as much as possible. Obviously, as I say, the whole Ambassador Awards are going to be put back to the later half of the year. And we're sort of thinking that we might make it a more simpler application process so that we can try and get more people to apply. We're hoping the application will be a bit more shorter, easier to complete, and we're thinking that we're going to put it online as well, that you can just complete it as an online form or an online survey, that kind of format. I know that most people will probably be entering in terms of something to do with COVID. So the proposal is at the minute that we probably will make it COVID focused. So it gives every company, organisation an opportunity to share what they've done, maybe share some pictures and video demonstrations, and give some key learning points to the rest of the group, because obviously, as we know, COVID is going to be around for a long time to come. So that's kind of that's the thoughts anyhow for the Ambassador Award. So has anybody got any questions or any suggestions about what else we could do, or any feedback in that?
Just one thing, Rich.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Just one thing on that is, do you have any graphics or anything to advertise it on company's own social media? If there isn't, could we get one done and just send it around everyone, that everyone's putting out the same thing at least?
Yep. We'd actually spoke about that, we need to get the logo obviously updated to be 2021 and things. So we were going to get a wee sort of flyer put together, the flyer we had used for this meeting, that sort of format, but I could get that put together and get it circulated then to everybody to share.
Yeah, brilliant.
Can I just say, Rachel, I really appreciate your efforts, and that sounds fabulous, sounds brilliant. Thank you for the April, just the students get their own award in April, and I appreciate you understanding the academic year, that we don't want this cohort of second years missing out. So that sounds great, and I really love your idea of the other awards going online, simple applications. So well done, and thanks for all your efforts. Clearly there's been a lot of thought put into that.
We just don't want the students to miss out on that opportunity, obviously, that they get at the awards, that they get to network, they get to meet the different companies and gain a better understanding. So it's just making sure that they don't miss out on that as well.
Yes, so that's fantastic.
Because the awards are always a good time for the students to network in terms of speaking to employers if they're looking for placements and that kind of thing as well.
Yes,
Definitely.
they are. So we still would like the students to, well, obviously we'll still invite them to the main awards in the, probably looking like the autumn. So they'll still hopefully have that opportunity. It'll just be a bit put back a little bit this year.
Thank you, Ursula.
Great. It's good to keep that contact up, Ursula. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's great.
We'll be by the end of next week, we'll be in a position to let you know who is the lucky winner. And the other thing I would like to say is if anybody would like to sponsor the Student Ambassador Award, again, let us know. We're always welcome for a sponsor or two. And if anybody wants to talk to the students, then you'll have that opportunity in late April, just when we get the final date set. We don't want to clash with anything at the university.
No, should be fine, April. I'm sure we can arrange something.
We'll sort something out. So
Lovely.
is that everything on the Student Ambassador Awards? That's great. Thank you so much, folks, for everything. I have one question under any other business. Michael McLaughlin, are you still there?
Oh, I'm here, Jim. I'm here.
Yes. As our resident student, have you any news?
I will see you for section C at the start of March.
Yep.
Yes, passed both.
On yourself, well done.
With a score of 83 on NG1.
Right.
Out of 100, and passed in an NG2, so it went well.
So don't ask for a remark then.
No. So Jim, I'll see you in a month's time.
Month's time, yes, indeed. Good luck. Well done, Michael. Very good job.
And as for the Student Ambassador Award, if you're looking for a sponsor for it, let us know. We're for sponsoring that.
Very good. And if I'm speaking to Darren, I'll tell him about your pay raise. Is that okay?
Jeez, you're lucky. I've been waiting a year and a half. Notice I said the other day, I said, sure, it's coming up to the end of the financial year. What about a pay raise? And he goes, need to wait and see how you do with this exam. And then he came out with, Justin, I need your help. He used the excuse of COVID's been a wild bad year. COVID's been a wild bad year. Oh, jeez. I says, well, sure, haven't we got low case numbers and we've put all our things in place? And I says, darn, change the record. Fed up hearing about this COVID, carry on. I says, we do everything we have to do. Get the money out. But no use there.
Well done.
Well done, Michael.
Thank you.
I see a couple of congratulations coming up. There's one from Paul Kincaid there. And
I love our Paul. Paul's good.
Paul's good. Brilliant job. Well done. Good man yourself. And that's Michael's just passed his NEBORS General Certificate.
Does that get mentioned in the notes there?
I was just noting that down to put in the minutes.
Just I'll frame that one and send it to my mum. I love that.
Just making sure Rachel gets that one into the notes, into the minutes.
Yeah.
Brilliant, folks. If there's no more questions, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you found that useful. Any ideas for new topics, sure, pop them through to Rachel or myself. Very glad to see any new ideas. And we'll be in touch with the date for the Ambassador Award, Student Ambassador Awards and the Ambassador Awards in the next month or so. So don't watch this space. We haven't actually gone away. COVID or no COVID, we haven't gone away yet. Other than that, folks, look, take care. And until we see each other again, take care and do the best you can to keep separated. All the best.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.